In this picture, we see our friends Carl Theodor Franz Wolfgang Jacobi and his pup enjoying a nice summer day. Wolfgang Jacobi was born October 25th, 1894, and he died December 15th, 1972. He was born in Bergen-auf-Rügen, Germany, and he passed away in Munich, Germany. He is a classical composer, and he has written many songs for the saxophone, the viola, the piano, and even the accordion. He has lived through major world events such as World War I and World War II. Much like today's world, Jacobi lived during war, poverty, civil unrest, and racism. In 1914 is when World War I began, and Jacobi decided to fight. Only 2 years later, however, he became a prisoner of war in France, and while there, he contracted tuberculosis. To recover from tuberculosis, he stayed in a rehab center in Switzerland, and this is where his love for music really flourished. The war ended in 1918, and once recovered from tuberculosis, Jacobi began studying composition and music theory at the Haas School for Music under Friedrich E. Koch. Like any good music student, Jacobi began teaching after his degree. He taught at the Kleinworth-Scharwenka Conservatorium, and he taught music theory here. Soon after, he began publishing and composing works. This is when Sonata for E-flat, alto saxophone, and piano was written. It was written between 1930 and 1932, and it was dedicated to his friend Sigurd Rascher. This is one of his most notable works. He also developed a love for the accordion. It is said, quote, "I have found a niche with music for the accordion. I have just returned covered with sweat and fame from the Trossinger Musiktage," end quote. While Jacobi wrote for saxophone and piano, he also had works for the accordion, which he developed a love for, and also viola, piano, and many more. Jacobi was thankfully thriving during this period. He wrote many pieces, and these clips feature his saxophone pieces, his viola pieces, and his accordion pieces. In the next picture, we see Jacobi and an accordion player, Giesla Walther. In 1933, things would take a turn for the worst. The Nazi Party regime began to rule Germany, and because of Jacobi's heritage and being part Jewish, he was unfortunately a victim of anti-Semitic laws. Due to these laws, Jacobi lost his teaching job at the conservatorium, and his music and all of his works were also removed from the public domain in Germany. During this time period, he also had a house fire. He lost his music and his house, and he was already severely living in poverty due to losing his job and not being able to work under these anti-Semitic laws. In 1934, Jacobi decided to take refuge in Italy, but due to his lack of funds, he had to return home to Germany in just under a year. Jacobi was faced with poverty, and it led to severe stress in his life. Jacobi could not do much during this time period. He had to wait out the war. This caused him a lot of stress due to the financial burden that he had. However, in 1945, thankfully, the war did end and Germany began rebuilding their country. Jacobi was welcomed back into the public domain, and he began teaching again, thankfully. He taught at the Munich, Germany Haas School for Music. He began teaching composition and theory, and he wrote many, many more pieces during this time. And one thing about Jacobi is that he did not change his style to fit modern trends. He really kept with what was true to him, and I believe that Jacobi did this to make up for lost time, that he could not write music due to his stress or due to his financial problems. I'd like to take the time to mention now that Jacobi was not alone during all of this. He had a family, and unfortunately, they all suffered through anti-Semitic laws. In 1922, Jacobi married Evelyn Rug, and in 1923, they had a son named Andreas, and in 1926, they had a daughter, Ursula. Jacobi has lived through many, many hard times, In 1914, he was a soldier for the First World War. 2 years later, he fell victim to prisoner of war and was held captive in France. He contracted tuberculosis. He recovered, thankfully, and in 1939, 1933 to 1945, he was subject to anti-Semitic laws. He fell victim to the Second World War and the Nazi regime. Unfortunately, he suffered through a lot. He went through some of the darkest times in our history. He lived through them, though. He survived and he flourished. He did have music on his side. His compositions were a great way to relieve anxiety. And in 1945, thankfully, the war ended and he could live on to be a very successful musician and composer. In 1972, on December 15th, however, Jacobi did pass away in Munich, Germany. The music world, they really lost a great man. He worked really hard, and he was such a true to his self composer, very authentic, very, very real. Now I want to discuss one of Jacobi's most noteworthy pieces. It will be the Sonata for E-flat, alto saxophone, and piano. This song is written with 3 movements, and today I'm going to focus on the first movement, Allegro mon non troppo. This song is written in ternary form. It has an A section, a B section, and an A prime section. This piece is not commonly played in saxophone literature, and I believe that this makes the music stand out, to be honest. When a piece is not played as much, it gives the audience something new and fresh to listen to, and it just really stands out. Speaking of standing out, the first 2 to 3 measures, the saxophone begins the piece unaccompanied. I believe that this really sets the tone for the piece, that the saxophone is here to shine, and it really does shine through. However, something about this piece, it has such an invigorating piano accompaniment that it's really like 2 solos into one. While the piano plays some of its own rhythms and melodies, the saxophone also does, but there is a lot of call and response in this piece. There are many prominent examples of call and response throughout this piece. I'm going to state that measures 63 through 72 has a very clear, prominent call and response that the piano starts with and the saxophone follows. This is also the beginning of A prime, and I will insert a clip of me playing right now. In measure 62, the saxophone also makes a statement piece that really jumps out to the audience as if Jacobi was making a declarative sentence, a statement, an exclamation point, if you will. This movement features many call and response sequences and also many statement pieces made by both the saxophone and the piano. Another thing about this piece is that it's always changing keys. It starts out in E melodic minor and it just goes everywhere else from there. The piece begins in E melodic minor, it switches to A flat major, it also changes to G major and B major for a short amount of time. The main takeaways and the main features of this piece has to include the different key changes that it goes throughout the whole movement, and also the call and response between the saxophone and the piano, and just the statement pieces that are made and sprinkled throughout the music. I'd like to conclude by stating a personal opinion of mine. Because this Music is rarely played in saxophone literature and repertoire. It adds a sense of freshness and newness to the audience and the players alike. And the Germanic feel that it gives off is so powerful and strong, and it's hard not to feel those emotions when you are playing or listening to it. Thank you.